Thanks very much, Ambassador. And I know we're running short on time, so I'll whip through some of my slides and focus as much as possible on India. But I want to start my remarks with a quick confession. And that confession is that while I'm very excited and honored to be here and take part in this conversation, which I think is hugely important, when I received an invitation to speak here in New Delhi, my first reaction was anxiety, really. And the reason for that is the study that I run, the annual study, the Soft Power 30, which we work with the University of Southern California Center on Public Diplomacy. It's been broadly received pretty well by global media and ministries of foreign affairs around the world. However, the one place where we get the most frequent and the most full-throated criticism of the study is here in India. And the reason for that is the study that we run is actually comprised of 60 different countries that we look at, but we only publish the top 30. And quick spoiler alert, India is not in the top 30, and so there are plenty of Indian foreign policy experts and commentators who get up in arms in this. How could you forget about India? How could you ignore India? So we don't ignore India, and I'm about to take you through and explain to you that we don't at all. They are included in the study. India has not yet broken through the top 30. And I hate to be a bad house guest in delivering what will be, I suppose, some mixed messages, but there's plenty of positives to think about as we look at how India's soft power does. So that's what I want to do is use the Soft Power 30 framework to tell you a bit about where India's soft power resources stack up with the rest of the world and where the areas that India could benefit from working on, but where the strengths that we could or India could potentially leverage more effectively. So I'm going to jump right into the main issue of measuring soft power. There we go. So we've handled definitions. We know where we are with what soft power is. So the study that I run is all about measuring soft power, and we've heard it can be nebulous, it can be hard to pin down, so what is this thing exactly? And that's what the Soft Power 30 tries to do, is look at what are the sources that make a country attractive to the rest of the world. And the reason that's important, this is a model here that Joseph Nye developed, which is his model for converting soft power into an eventual outcome. And the first step of that model is understanding the resources that a country has. And without that clear account of what you've got to work with, there's no point in talking a good game about soft power. So that's what the Soft Power 30 sets out to do, is to identify the resources of countries. So it's not so much about how well you use those resources, but what have you got to work with. And so this is the basic framework. And the point of the Soft Power 30 is that it combines objectively assessed data with international polling data as well. And the objective data and the polling data really starts with Joseph Nye's three key pillars of sources of soft power, which are political values, culture, and foreign policy. And then we over a number of years have done a lot of academic literature review to look at what are the other factors that have an impact on perceptions of a country. And this is essentially our conclusion of what are those factors. And so we set out to measure them. So this is the objective data. We start with that political values, which we capture in government. We look at foreign policy, which is engagement, like how well connected is a country, what's your diplomatic network, how many friends do you have, your membership of different international clubs, and key leadership on big issues like environmentalism and overseas aid. Culture captures both high culture as well as pop culture. Enterprise is like how attractive is a country's economic and business model. Digital looks at a country's digital infrastructure as well as their digital diplomacy network. And then education is all around higher education, quality of universities, number of international students, as well as academic publishing. So those are the six main sources of objective data. But then soft power is inherently subjective, and so we have to embrace that in our design of measuring it. So we poll 25 different countries, 11,000 people, nationally representative samples in each of these countries to sort of get them to assess countries on 7 different key aspects, the most common touch points that they might experience a country, or through which they might experience a country. Some things like cuisine, culture, how welcoming they think a country might be, as well as the perceptions of a country's foreign policy. I'm going to skip through the results. They don't really matter that much. I invite you to look at the study. You can find it at softpower30.com. And I just want to get straight to India. I did try and quickly address the UK, which came top this year, which seems really strange with Brexit. Of course, Kieran, I'm sorry, you're going to have a tough job ahead of you next year. And the main point I want to make is, the UK has a great balance of assets. Has the UK left the European Union yet? No, it hasn't. And so all the assessment that was done for this year's study shows that the UK is still in the European Union and still in a good position, even though it looks like, frankly, a bit of a basket case right now. Again, Kieran, I'm sorry. But you still have some great resources to work with. And when it does leave the European Union, life's going to get more difficult for the UK. On to India. So India overall came 41st out of 60. On the face of it, this looks like an underperformance, and admittedly, I think it is an underperformance for India when you consider all that it has to offer. But we can break that down a little bit and see what happens. So India has big strengths. Its clear strengths are in digital, in government, being the world's biggest democracy, and in culture, which I guess shouldn't surprise us that much. And we can break that down a bit further. So this is looking at all the objective metrics, right? All the objective metrics are structured into sub-indices, and you can look at a country's individual performance on those. So like I said, digital, government, and culture, this is where they rank out of the 60 countries. So they haven't broken into the top 30 in those strengths, but they're knocking on the door. And then there's a bit of a weighing effect from enterprise, engagement, and education. And I'll come to engagement in a bit. Now, if we look at the polling data, India does much better on culture, which shouldn't really surprise us, and that's where India does break into the top 30. So there's a recognition of, there's benefits of being the world's, longest continuous civilization, obviously, and people do recognize Indian culture. And then technology as well, India does fairly well. But cuisine, I feel like that's an area where India should be doing better, but it's not cutting through. But maybe given the discussion we had this morning, it's on the up, so that's one to watch. So let me just leave with a few final thoughts. I know I've whipped through this very quickly. The first is that I know on the whole, India's overall ranking looks like a bit of an underperformance, but there are real strengths that India can use in terms of its soft power, particularly around culture and digital, as well as playing up its political values and being the world's largest democracy. But fundamental issues remain, which we're all aware of, issues around pollution and sanitation, and how India is portrayed as well, my third point, in terms of global media. Global media is rarely helpful when it comes to presentation of India. And a lot of that comes down to some of the big issues that they like to just hammer away on. So there is an image problem, and there is a need for India to tell its side of the story more effectively. And related to that is that I think India needs, and I'm not saying it doesn't have this, but it clearly doesn't cut through. India needs a clear mission, a global role that is bigger than itself. And it's from the presentation from the ambassador, it's clearly there's substance there to it, but it's not getting across. And related to that, I think for a country of its size and importance, India needs a bigger diplomatic network. It is smaller than, I'm trying to remember, I think I'm going to get this wrong. I want to say Belgium has more embassies abroad than India, which just seems crazy. And I think for a country of India's importance, it needs to be out there and be building more of its own platforms to leverage some of its assets. And that's really my fifth and final point, is that an expanded, empowered diplomatic network would go a long way to India being able to get its own point across. So that's my overview. I hope that was just a helpful take and a step back to see where does India's soft power stand right now globally, and we can focus on the positives, which there are plenty to take away. Thank you.